I told her I should go, but when her hand found mine, the whole world went quiet. It had been months since I last stepped into her house, yet somehow, everything looked exactly the same quiet order, the same warmth in the walls, the faint scent of sandalwood and coffee that seemed to belong only to her. The evening light stretched softly across the living room, painting the edges of the furniture in gold. She looked up from the couch as I knocked gently on the half-open door. "You still remember to knock," she said, smiling in that calm, teasing way of hers. Her voice had that low, even tone, the kind that felt both distant and familiar, like a song you've known all your life but hadn't heard in a while. I held up the book I came to return, a small excuse to see her again. "Thought you might want this back," I said. She took it, fingers brushing mine just slightly. That single moment, the warmth of her skin, the steadiness in her touch, felt too real, too grounding for such a small gesture. For a second, I forgot to breathe. "You always took care of things better than I did," she murmured, turning the book over in her hands. Then she glanced at me, her eyes softening. "You've changed." I tried to laugh, but it came out thinner than I meant it to. "People do." She studied me for a moment, really looked at me. Not the kind of look people give when they're being polite, but one that searches for what's hidden between words. It made me shift a little, unsure what to do with the silence stretching between us. "Sit," she said finally, motioning toward the armchair near the window. I did, grateful for something to do with my hands. The rain had started outside, tapping lightly against the glass. She went to pour tea, and I watched her move, the quiet confidence in her steps, the way her sleeve slipped just enough to reveal her wrist. Everything about her seemed deliberate and unhurried, as if time slowed down for her alone. She handed me a cup, her fingers brushing mine again, warmer this time, more certain. "You still take it without sugar?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Still stubborn?" She smiled at that, a real one this time, the kind that reached her eyes. And for a moment, the room didn't feel like a place I was visiting. It felt like somewhere I was returning to. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Inside, her gaze lingered a second too long. Something quiet passed between us, not spoken, not named, but alive. And though I told myself I'd only stay a minute, I already knew I wouldn't be leaving soon. The rain began softly at first, a quiet drizzle that pressed against the windows like an old memory. It carried that familiar scent of wet earth and stillness, filling the room with something almost tender. She turned toward the sound, smiling faintly. "Looks like you're not leaving anytime soon." I laughed under my breath, setting the empty teacup aside. "Guess the weather made that decision for me." She rose from the couch, moving toward the kitchen. "Then we might as well have real coffee." I followed her, not because I needed to, but because something about her presence pulled me in. The kitchen was warm, small, and softly lit. The air carried that mix of roasted beans and the faint trace of her perfume. She reached up to the cabinet for mugs, and I caught myself watching, not out of curiosity, but quiet admiration. There was grace in her simplest movements. "Still know where everything is?" she asked without turning. "I never really forgot," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. The kettle whistled, steam curling into the air between us. She handed me a spoon, our fingers touching again, and this time neither of us pretended not to notice. The moment lingered, not awkward, not forced, just heavy with something unspoken. "Rain makes everything feel slower," she said, stirring her cup. "Maybe that's why people talk more when it rains," I replied. She looked up at me, eyes soft but searching. "Or maybe it just makes silence easier to sit in." That line, the way she said it, sank into me. There was meaning under her calm tone, the kind that doesn't need explaining. We stood there for a long time, listening to the rain against the roof, letting the quiet stretch comfortably. Finally, she leaned back against the counter, cradling her mug. "You've grown into yourself," she said. "There's something steadier about you now." But your eyes, she paused, almost as if catching herself. They still look the same. I didn't know what to say to that. Instead, I smiled faintly, meeting her gaze. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Her lips curved, the kind of half-smile that hides more than it reveals. No, she said softly. It's not. The clock ticked quietly between us. The world outside blurred through the rain, but in that small kitchen, everything felt sharp, every sound, every glance, every slow heartbeat. She reached for the sugar jar, her hand brushing against mine again, deliberately this time. The touch wasn't bold, just enough to feel real. When she finally pulled her hand back, she whispered, almost to herself, "It's strange, isn't it? How familiar things can still surprise you." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The rain continued its steady rhythm, and for the first time that evening, neither of us looked away. It wasn't love yet. But it was something that had quietly begun to remember how. After a while, the rain eased into a soft mist, leaving behind that gentle quiet that only comes after a storm. The kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath. We carried our coffee cups back into the living room, still warm in our hands, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I noticed it, the old record player in the corner. Its lid was half open, a thin layer of dust around the edges. I remembered it from years ago, from afternoons when her house felt like a place where time didn't matter. Back then, she used to play music while she cooked, humming under her breath, sometimes lost in thought. "You still have that?" I asked, nodding toward it. She followed my gaze, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "It still works, on good days," she said. Then, almost absently, she walked over and lifted the lid fully. The vinyl inside was already on the turntable, an old song I hadn't heard in years. The needle touched down with a soft crackle, and a familiar melody filled the room. Warm, mellow, full of echoes. She stood there for a second, eyes closed, as if the sound itself had reached somewhere deep inside her. "I didn't think you'd remember this," she said quietly. "How could I forget?" I replied. "You used to play it almost every evening." She laughed, soft, wistful. "I guess I did." Her laughter faded into the rhythm of the song. I watched her from across the room, the gentle curve of her shoulders, the way her fingers traced along the wooden edge of the player. There was something both strong and fragile about her, like she was built out of memory and sunlight. When she turned, our eyes met, and something in that look made the air shift. She didn't look away this time. The space between us felt small, charged, alive. She spoke again, almost in a whisper. "Funny how music remembers us, even when we try to forget." I took a slow breath. Maybe it's not the music. Maybe it's the moments we left inside it. Her gaze softened, a flicker of something uncertain crossing her face, like she was fighting the instinct to pull back but didn't. She took a step closer, then another, until I could feel the faint warmth of her presence just an arm's length away. The song played on, a slow rhythm, tender and full of ache. I could hear her breathing, steady but shallow. The rain outside had stopped completely, but it didn't matter, the sound of that old record filled every corner of the room. Neither of us said another word. We just stood there, caught in that small, infinite space where music and silence meet, and something new, something quietly dangerous, began to take shape. The music faded, its last few notes dissolving into the soft hum of the house. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. Full of what hadn't been said, full of the echo of her voice, full of something neither of us wanted to name yet. I found myself walking toward the shelf by the window, drawn by a photograph in a simple wooden frame. It was her, years younger, standing beside a man I'd only ever seen once or twice. Her late husband. They both looked happy, wind in their hair, sunlight caught in their smiles. She noticed me looking. "That was taken in Italy," she said quietly. "Florence. He'd promised we'd go back every year." Her voice didn't tremble, but there was a pause, that kind of pause that carries weight. I turned slightly toward her, uncertain if I should speak. "You don't have to, no, it's okay," she interrupted gently, stepping closer. "It's strange how long grief can live in the corners of a house. You move the furniture, paint the walls, fill the shelves with new things, but it still lingers. Not painfully, not anymore. Just, quietly." She stopped beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. The air between us seemed to thicken, filled with memory and restraint. "I used to hate that photo," she admitted, eyes still on it. "Not because of him, but because I wasn't ready to see her. The woman I was back then." There was something in her tone, not sadness, exactly, but recognition. Acceptance. I looked at her, really looked. The lines at the corners of her eyes, the calm grace in her expression, she wasn't the woman in that photograph anymore. She was deeper now, more grounded, more real. "You're still her," I said softly. "Just stronger." She turned her head then, meeting my eyes. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she exhaled slowly, and her hand, hesitating at first, came to rest on the edge of the frame. My hand followed almost without thought, brushing against hers. Her fingers stilled beneath mine, warm and alive. She didn't pull away. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. Her thumb moved slightly, tracing the edge of my hand, not a gesture of romance, but of recognition. Of something waking up between two people who had both been quiet for too long. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "I think I just got used to being alone." I swallowed, my words barely more than a whisper. "Maybe you were just waiting for someone who'd understand the silence." She looked at me again, and in her eyes, there wasn't sorrow anymore. Just light. Soft, hesitant, human light. The photograph sat between us, two lives behind glass. But in that moment, it felt like we were the ones being developed, slowly, tenderly, into something new. The night had grown deeper without us noticing. The record had stopped playing long ago, the rain outside had quieted to a whisper, and only the soft ticking of the clock filled the pauses between our breaths. The living room light had dimmed to a warm glow, the kind that makes everything feel closer, gentler, harder to walk away from. We were still sitting side by side, the half-empty coffee mugs forgotten on the table. She'd drawn her knees slightly toward herself, her sweater slipping from one shoulder. Every now and then, she'd glance at me as if about to say something, then look away, her lips parting and closing again like she was still deciding. I wanted to say something too, but the words sat heavy on my tongue. Everything that needed saying was already there, somewhere in the quiet. Eventually, I glanced at the clock and let out a soft breath. "It's late," I said. "I should go." The words came out steadier than I felt. It wasn't just a polite goodbye, it was a defense. Because if I didn't leave now, I wasn't sure I'd be able to. She looked up, eyes soft, unreadable. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then she nodded faintly and murmured, "All right." I stood, reaching for my jacket from the chair. The air shifted as I moved, that small, delicate shift that comes before distance. She rose too, following me to the doorway. Neither of us filled the silence. It didn't feel right to. I reached for the handle, fingers brushing the cool metal, but before I could open it, I felt it, her hand, closing around my wrist. It wasn't a sudden grab, it was slow, almost uncertain, but firm enough that I stopped. Her hand was warm, steady, trembling just slightly against my skin. I turned. She stood close, her eyes fixed on mine. There was something unguarded in them, not desperation, but honesty. The kind of truth people hide until they can't anymore. "Not just yet," she said. The words were soft, barely above a whisper, but they hit harder than anything else that night. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just looked at her, the way the light caught in her hair, the small tremor in her hand, the quiet strength in her gaze. I could feel her pulse beneath my skin, quick but sure. "I didn't mean to keep you," she added, voice lower now, as if apologizing for feeling too much. "You didn't," I said, finally. "I just didn't trust myself to stay." Her grip tightened slightly, then loosened, but she didn't let go completely. "Then stay until you can." The clock ticked again, louder somehow, marking the moment. And though I knew I could still walk away, I also knew I wouldn't. Not tonight. Not after that. The door never opened. I stayed, not because I planned to, but because something in her voice had taken away the need for excuses. When she said, "Not just yet," it was as though time itself had shifted, and suddenly, the night wasn't something to escape from, it was something to be inside of. She released my wrist gently, almost as if afraid she'd overstepped, but I didn't move away. The space between us felt fragile, like glass. If either of us spoke too loudly, it might shatter. So we didn't. We just stood there, the faint hum of the lamp and the quiet rhythm of our breathing the only sounds in the room. After a moment, she turned toward the couch. "Sit," she said softly, her tone steady again but her eyes still uncertain. I followed her back without a word. We sat side by side, not touching at first. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving only the distant echo of dripping water from the roof. The air smelled of coffee, rain, and something else, warmth, maybe. That quiet scent of comfort you can't describe but you know when you feel it. Her shoulders lowered, like she'd been holding her breath for hours. "I didn't mean to keep you," she said again, but her voice lacked conviction. "You didn't," I replied. "I wanted to stay." Her eyes turned toward me, and I could see the surprise flicker there, soft, quick, then gone. She nodded once, almost to herself, and leaned back against the couch. Slowly, her arm brushed against mine, not by accident, not fully on purpose either. I could feel the warmth of her skin through the sleeve of her sweater. It wasn't electric. It was grounding, like something steady beneath all the noise we'd both carried. Without thinking too hard about it, I lifted my arm and let it rest gently behind her shoulders. She hesitated for only a second before leaning into me, her head finding that quiet space beneath my chin. Her hair brushed against my jaw, soft, faintly scented with rain and something floral. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only movement was the slow, even rise and fall of her breathing against my chest. I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, calm now, no longer uncertain. Her voice came eventually, small but clear. "It's been a long time since someone stayed just to stay." I swallowed hard. "Then maybe you've just been waiting for the right reason." She smiled against me, and I felt it more than I saw it, that quiet curve of warmth pressed lightly against my chest. Her hand rested over my heart, not searching, not testing, just being there. The clock ticked on, the night deepened, and in that stillness, everything felt whole. No promises, no confessions, just the peace of knowing that neither of us was alone anymore. The first thing I noticed was the light, soft and golden, spilling through the half-open curtains. It stretched across the room like something alive, brushing gently over the wooden floor, the books, the quiet hum of morning. The night had dissolved without either of us noticing. She was still there, resting lightly against me, her head tilted toward my shoulder. At some point, she'd fallen asleep, her breathing slow, steady, peaceful. I didn't move. There was something sacred about the stillness, as if breaking it would undo everything that had quietly built between us. Outside, the rain had given way to birdsong, faint but hopeful. I watched the light shift across her face, catching the tiny strands of hair that had fallen over her cheek. She looked different in the morning, not softer, just more real. Like the walls she carried inside herself had finally let in the light. After a few minutes, her eyes opened. She blinked, squinting a little at the brightness. When she realized she was still leaning against me, a small, almost shy smile touched her lips. "Morning," she said, her voice husky from sleep. "Morning," I echoed. "I didn't mean to stay this long." "I know," she said, stretching slightly. "But I'm glad you did." She stood slowly, moving toward the kitchen, and the sound of her bare feet against the floor filled the silence like music. I watched her as she poured water into the kettle, humming quietly to herself, the same old tune from last night. Something about that small, unguarded sound made my chest tighten. "Tea?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Tea sounds good." She handed me a mug a few minutes later, and we sat by the window. Outside, the world looked new, washed clean, full of light. The rain had left tiny droplets on the glass that shimmered when the sun caught them. For a while, we just watched. The quiet between us wasn't awkward now. It felt like something we'd earned. Finally, she spoke, eyes still on the window. "You know, I used to hate mornings. They were too quiet. Too empty. And now?" I asked. She took a slow sip before answering. "Now they feel peaceful." Her gaze drifted toward me then, not searching, not questioning, just seeing. The kind of look that said everything words couldn't. I smiled softly. "Guess that's a good sign." She nodded. "It is." When it was finally time to leave, she walked me to the door again, but this time, there was no hesitation. The air felt lighter, easier. As I stepped outside, she touched my arm lightly, her fingers lingering for a heartbeat. "You were right where you needed to be," she said. I turned to her, sunlight brushing across her face, and for the first time, I didn't feel the pull of leaving. I felt the calm of having arrived. The door closed gently behind me, but her warmth stayed, not in my hand, not in the air, but somewhere quieter. Somewhere I knew I'd carry it. Forever, in the quiet spaces of my heart.